Everybody, Beth Holland here from EdTechTeacher. So thank you very much for everybody who is joining us live this afternoon. And if you are joining us live right now and you're on our webinars page, we do have a chat set up. So if you can, go ahead and introduce yourself, and that would be great. I'm hearing myself in duplicate for a second there, which means we are streaming. So if you can go ahead, if you're listening to us live, and introduce yourselves in the chat, that would be great. But I am super excited with our three special guests today. So I've got an amazing team joining us from the iPad Academy in Nebraska. And this is really excited. I've been trying to find a way to get this group involved with us for a while and to have them be able to share their story. So I'm glad we finally managed to work this out. I was dying to meet them in person, but I think we're going to have to start with Google Hangout until I get to Nebraska. So with that, I'm going to turn it over and let the team say hello and introduce themselves and let us all know all about them. So go ahead, guys, take it away.
I'm Ann Feldman, and this is
Jeff Burnett.
And I'm Jeanette Carlson.
And together we are the Tech Trio from Bellevue Public Schools in Bellevue, Nebraska. And we are just excited to be here too to share our story, Beth. So thanks so much for inviting us.
Yes.
All right, fantastic. So if you don't mind, just to take a few more minutes, and if you can each tell us a little bit more about, how you got to this room. So like, what are you doing in Bellevue, and sort of what are your backgrounds, and how are you coming to all of this?
Absolutely. My background, I was a former middle school math and French teacher, crazy combination, but math is kind of a foreign language, so it all worked out great. And then I went on into now instructional technology. So about 15 years in instructional technology, and I wear a lot of hats in this role, but one of my favorites is iPad Academy coach.
Year in education, the 12 prior to this one, I was a social studies teacher at the high school level, mainly teaching freshman American history. And it was 3 years ago that I was given the opportunity to have a class set of iPads in my classroom, and that pretty much transformed everything, my entire career, my classroom, my interaction with my students. And just this last school year, I stepped out of the classroom to join this team to continue to support our teachers in technology and instruction within the classroom. So really excited to be working with these two and trying to have a greater impact with our students and teachers throughout our district.
And this is my, 15th or 16th year, something like that, with teaching. And I'm a former business teacher and technology teacher, and started in a little small town in the middle of Nebraska. And then moved here to Bellevue and started along with Jeff, started in the iPad Academy a couple years ago, and had the training of Ann and Jenny and Brent, who started the iPad Academy, and as Jeff said, definitely transformed, changed my classroom, and I was so excited about what they were doing, which led me to this role. And this was really my dream role, was always to teach and help teachers and intern students with technology. So I am exactly where I want to be, and it's a fantastic team, and it's pretty powerful.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the most exciting things. For as many years as I've been into education, this is one of the most exciting things I've been a part of. And part of the team I was working with when this was born was Jenny Christofchuk and Brent Catlett, and we were all a bunch of dreamers, and we were dreaming this out. What could happen to culture, and what would that look like, and what things need to be in place? And so kind of how it takes a village to make that happen. There's so many people who helped get us to where we are today, from having an awesome tech department to have the infrastructure in place, to having the commitment and the funds for substitute teachers and equipment, and all it takes to sustain and maintain what we have in our iPad Academy, and then really make that difference in those classrooms. So it's just a thrill to be a part of something that's really transforming the educational landscape.
Cool. So you've been mentioning, I introduced you as that, part of the iPad Academy, and I know you've all alluded to it, but can you tell us more about, like, what exactly do you mean by the iPad Academy? How did it evolve? What role does it play with your districts? And just give us a little bit more background information. That'd be great.
Sure, absolutely. I'd be happy to tell you a little of those details. We had a district technology committee that had formed, and out of that committee decided that we really needed to lower that student to device ratio in the district. And what device would that be? The committee decided an iPad would be a great tool for that. And so from there we had to decide, well, what's that going to look like? Because without effective PD, what would happen, we just have some devices, but we wouldn't really be transforming the educational landscape. So really put a lot of thought into that, and to think about how could we create a professional development system that would be systemic and sustainable. And so we kind of dreamed that out, and we're like, the bottom line is teachers need time. Time seems to be one of those key factors that's always missing. So how can we build a constructivist approach towards implementing the device with their pedagogy to create something awesome? So we rolled that around for a little while, and we said, well, we have to have some training. And so we decided that 6 days of training would be a great amount of training for teachers, so they'd be really fluent in the device. But that wouldn't be enough, because well, then what? Well, then we would really need to have them have those devices with somebody. So we decided you need to have a coach come with you in that classroom. And then from there, we're like, well, that's also not enough. We need to have more than that. We need to have ongoing constant support. So then we built in what we call our collab days. And so every quarter, everybody in the iPad Academy has a sub for a day and can come and collaborate and work together. So we started kind of knitting that whole thing together, and as that started to evolve, it kind of came out of that group think, that we would sit down together and brainstorm how this would look. And iPad Academy was born out of all of those ideas. So we're like, okay, we'll have teachers volunteer for this training. The district accommodated the subs, and after they completed the training, during that training process, the teachers received an iPad. Then once they successfully completed the training, they had to fill out an application for the iPad Academy. And we would use a rubric to go ahead and look at all of their artifacts they created while they were in our training sessions, and we would sit down and go through the rubrics and then look at those applications and really vet those applications, and then that's how the people were selected. So it was really based on merit of their work. They received the iPad. So from there, coming into the classroom every day and working with the teachers is really where we saw really the beginning. Again, you would think, 6 days of training prepared you to have the devices, but to really use them with instruction, it is as different and unique as each teacher. Us going in to work with them in their classrooms and that side-by-side coaching really took it from one step to the next, from enhancing to transforming the classroom. So we really also built that around the frameworks of the SAMR model and Gagne and TPAC, and kind of morphed all of that together into really some great frameworks that helped us scaffold things for teachers.
And as a teacher, that's so powerful. You need that training. But I think the biggest out of those three parts, when you talk about the foundation of the training, and then you talk about the coaching, and then that gift of time and that collaboration, it's those last two that are really, that foundation of training is huge, and you have to have it. But that ongoing coaching in the classroom, and, because as teachers, we want to do better things and engage our students and find better strategies, but it's also scary. It's scary to change. It's scary to try something new. But when you have somebody there that's kind of pushing you, supporting you, and is there to, especially in that tech, I was a teacher who, I enjoyed tech. I wanted to utilize tech, but I'd never considered myself a techie teacher or a techie guy. And so that was always a barrier. I was always scared to try something. And having a coach there that understands, and that sometimes you even look at each other and say, oh, it didn't work. And that just having that person to say, it's okay, and let's figure out why it didn't work and try something new was so huge. And, Anne being my coach, anytime I got comfortable and we'd have success, it was like, okay, that's great. Now what's next? And so it's that you continue to be pushed to new levels and really to get out of your comfort zone. And I think that's one of the most important things that teachers really need mindset all the time. But you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to grow and continue to change what you're doing, and to have that ongoing support, and then have a group of other teachers doing it with you. It is so, so important. And so that's, I think, the powerful part of the iPad Academy is it's the people coming together and working together, supporting one another, and kind of continuing to push each other. And that's why you're seeing such a dramatic shift in our culture and our classrooms truly transforming.
And as Jeff was saying, if I piggyback off of that, the collab days that we have, that third part that he said was so crucial. And he said, you get to a point where you get comfortable, and Anne wouldn't let him get comfortable. We have to move forward. That's why it's so important for us to keep the collaboration days. We're 3 years into this. Some of these teachers have been doing this for 2 years. We can't just say, okay, we're done. We don't need the collaboration days anymore. to continue to push and transform and move. And so we fight really hard to keep those days, and our district has been very supportive of that and realize the importance of that for those teachers so that they can continue. And I think if I back up a little bit and give a shout out, I guess, to Anne and Brent and Jenny and the people in the district that started this, that they did it the right way, because I have some eyes into some other places, and I can see where districts have a lot of technology and a lot of devices, but they maybe don't have that support and that training about. And you can spend a lot of money and have a lot of devices, but it's a waste of money if that foundation isn't set and you're really empowering those teachers and supporting those teachers and continuing with that process. And it should never, ever quit.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and to kind of piggyback on that as well, with that training piece, initially we brought some trainers into the district, and the Apple trainers came in to train our initial 2 cadres with the Apple Foundations training, which was fantastic because that really brought common language and a common ground to everyone, and everyone had a certain fluency then with the devices, both their computer and their iPads. And then after that, we were lucky enough that Jenny Kristofchuk and I were both selected to be Apple Foundations trainers, and we're able to go out to California and spend a week in Cupertino and learn the Apple Foundations curriculum. And when we came back, we were able to deliver that Apple Foundations curriculum to our people. So having that also being taught by our own people really made a difference, because we know the culture here already and the relationships with all of the teachers. So that's another piece that was really successful, and that really came, again, like Jeanette said, a shout out to our district to supporting that at another level. And then our boss at the time was Greg Botker, that allowed that all to take place and the funds for that. So now we have 165 teachers that have been trained and have been through our iPad Foundations training. And now we're at the state of just waiting for some funding so we can move even deeper into this. So those 50 classrooms that we have now, each one is unique, but each one, when you walk in the door, it's been completely transformed. There's no front of the room anymore. It's hard to find the teacher. It's just interesting to see that shift that's happened in their instruction. And as a direct result of having a tool in the student's hands every single day, all the time. Constant access to the iPad, where you have a video, you have audio, you can tape record, you have the camera, you have the web, and you can create. And having a tool now will allow our teachers to move where they've always wanted to go. But having the tool, it's now possible.
And the tricky little thing that we're doing, and that these guys started, is that we are training people, our own people, as Anne said, that as we get more devices, and those teachers in those classrooms can be the trainers. And so now we're using people, because obviously 3 of us cannot handle the entire district and being in every classroom. As we grow, that's the great thing that I think they started also, was using our people to train the teachers that will eventually have that technology in their classroom.
I think what's really been wonderful when we're coaching is we have a Google Doc that we share with the person that we're coaching, and we give them a list of about 20 different items that we can kind of, wherever they want to start, we start. And then each week, as we sit and work with them and in their classrooms, we kind of add to their Google Doc, so we know what their goals are and how we can help them move toward those goals. And we always have that communication path open with them. And I think that's the other piece that's huge, is with that relationship building, we start to build those relationships during our Apple Foundations training, and then we continue to build those relationships in the classrooms and always have a communication path with the people in our classrooms. So we use a variety of ways too, the Google Docs, to really keep track of where we've been with them and where we're going, but we also stay in touch with texting and Voxer and a lot of different ways to easily connect our classrooms and connect to one another, which is really important too. Kind of an ongoing conversation.
That's right. Absolutely.
So have everybody worked with so far been on a voluntary basis?
That's correct. Everybody has self-selected for our iPad Academy, and right now everyone has been through Apple Foundations training, which was also that also that training. So yes, unasked question there is, what people don't maybe want the technology, then what happens? And that'll be something as we continue to move forward. But so far, we really feel strongly that we do have some examples where little pockets in our design iPads and have not had any training. And again, to do the training with them, because that training to their growth with the iPads, sometimes when you have the device, you don't know what's possible. And then, we've noticed that definitely different. The transformation is just much slow. You need to bring them in and always have that training piece.
And one of the strengths of that is that we started out so small and we've kind of grown slowly. And in the beginning, like, get more and more devices. But I think as we look back, we really appreciate this slow movement, because I think that more and more teachers, as they're seeing teachers in different buildings and across the hallway and what they're doing, they maybe would have been reluctant 3 years ago, but as they start to see a teacher doing so many amazing things, they start, I can do this, or I want to do that. And so we have so many teachers in our district that are just banging on our door saying, we want iPads, we want this for our students. Slow kind of movement that we're actually on. Although in the beginning we'd like, oh, we want more, or we only blessing in disguise for us, because we really of teachers that are starting to really see the power of iPads and having devices, mobile devices in students' hands. And even though there's always going to be in that group that's a little scared and worried and not sure, I think that because of this path, we have a lot fewer of those, a lot less of those teachers than we would otherwise. And I think that's really kind of cool.
Right.
Sorry.
No, and I think, part of the piece too. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I keep muting and unmuting so you don't hear the feedback. But I was just curious if you could elaborate too, and maybe, Anne, this is where you're going on, like, what are some of those success stories that you've seen that you're just like, wow, I can't believe this is where, we've gone from start to finish?
We have got so many success stories when we start to think about, in even which area we want to talk about some of the success stories. But I think one story that always sticks out in my head is the story of a little fella who was only 8 years old that spent most of his day in a special classroom because it was very difficult to stay in the regular ed classroom. His success story, he just blossomed in the iPad Academy culture, where there's a lot of choice, student ownership of the learning, student-centered learning. And as those pieces were implemented in his classroom, he was able to stay longer and longer in the classroom. And by the end of the school year, he never left the classroom. And this was a student who was spending most of his day not in a regular ed classroom. And you think, gosh, that is so powerful, because he is able to receive the differentiation that he needs right in his own seat, with his own little community of learners, in his own classroom, with his own teacher.
Motion lights.
The motion lights, yes.
We haven't moved enough.
I heard the beat.
But that, to me, just speaks volumes to just the fact that what we can do to privately differentiate and discreetly differentiate and keep all kids in the least restrictive environment. I mean, that was just huge. And I'll never forget, too, this little girl, Amelia, it's just so cute. She is in one of our iPad Academy classrooms, and her teacher created a screencast where she recorded herself reading the test. And so everyone put on their little headphones and they were listening to the test, and they could pause and rewind their teacher and listen again and again. And Amelia was one of the last kiddos done with her test. And afterwards I asked her, I said, well, how did your test go? What did you think about listening to your test? And she goes, this is the first time I didn't cry. She goes, usually when I take a test, I cry, but this time I didn't. If I had a question, I could just rewind. You just think that speaks volumes to maybe a student who was scared to raise their hand to ask a question, or not to have things just differentiated. But I think while that's good for those little stories like that, it's good for all kids. And so I'm going to let Jeff speak to that, because his classroom completely transformed around that idea right there.
Well, you kept hearing differentiation from Ann, and that's something our district over the last 5 years especially has invested so much money. And we all know as educators that differentiation is so important for our students, but at the same time, it's so hard for teachers to do. Like, how do I have 25, 30 students who are so diverse in their learning styles and in their intelligence and their levels of learning? Where do I even start? So I think we all want to do that. And after my semester with Ann, I really took the summer to reflect on, okay, I have this amazing tool. What can I really do? How can I transform my classroom? And I was sitting on my couch and I was watching and following ISTE 13. And the final keynote in that summer was Adam Bello. And in one of his statements completely transformed my classroom. He said at one point that every student should have an IEP, an individual educational plan. And right there I said, that's it. This tool right here that's the strength of it. It can differentiate for our students. And so I completely broke down my classroom and figured out how can I build it up with that mentality. And IEP for everybody. When they come into my American history class, how can each kid have their own kind of learning plan? And that's where I went from there. So kids, when they came into my classroom, I'd broken down everything from all the objectives down, and they got to choose their path to learning, I called it. So they had multiple paths that I could provide them because of the iPad, including video lectures of me, different great resources in their textbook or online, primary source documents. I then said, okay, you learn it on your own. You figure out. I'm also here for you. You choose your path, take it. And then they also got to choose their evidence of learning. How are they going to show me that they know it? And so it really became a choice and student-driven classroom that just, it took all of the learning and threw it back on them. And I always tell people that, when I used to think about my classroom, I was like, how am I going to teach this? What am I going to do to teach this? And instead now I started to really transform and shift in how are the kids going to learn it? And then you think, well, they're all different. I got to give them options. And, before having a device in my students' hands, that was overwhelming and it seemed almost impossible. But with a powerful device like the iPad, it just opened up so many doors. And that's really, then when you add on the reflection piece and getting kids to reflect, whether through video reflection or written reflection, it just became, and then instead of, as my kids are working, I don't have to be up in front of the classroom anymore. I can now be amongst them and with them. People always think, well, relationships are going to go away with students. Well, no, they actually increase, because instead of talking to a room full of 30 kids, I'm now talking to 1 or 2 kids at a time on a daily basis, multiple times during the class. And so my relationships with my iPad kids, because at first I just had one class of iPad students, and those relationships were so strong that the second year I had to figure out a way to get the iPads into all my kids' hands, because my relationships were so much stronger and so much better. I knew my students way better, but more importantly, I knew what they were learning and I knew where they were at. And so that was, just allowing myself to be able to interact individually with students and to individualize that learning for them was by far the greatest gift I could give them. And so it was really cool. Jeanette, what about you?
Absolutely. And we came at the same time, so we have a lot of the same stories and ideas too, but I started the same way with one classroom. I picked one classroom to use out of my 5, had about 30 kids in each classroom, and after, I think a semester probably, I decided I can't have those sitting there. I have to use it as a shared model. I have to get it into my hand. And one of the things with choice, but it also they showed what they knew. And so I really dug into different ways to assess students and check for understandings, those do nows when they come in or the exit tickets. And having a device in each kid's hand allowed me to really, narrow down my focus and target my instruction. So I started really basic with something like Socrative. And they would come in and do 3 or 4 or 5 questions, and immediately I'd throw that up on the board and we could look at the color coding of who got it right or wrong without showing student names, and I could immediately at that point in time correct. I could reteach, we could move on, and that was really powerful for me. And after doing a review with the students, I had all 70 of my students pass a test for the first time. This included all of my kids from the lowest to the highest. And I thought, I was still, is this working? Is that anything to do with the iPads? And I asked the students, and I just verbally said, and I wrote these things down and wrote a blog about it. I said, why did this happen? Why do you think? And they said it was the review. I was able to do it home. I was able to do it here. I did it at my own pace was something someone said. Somebody said, I knew exactly what I needed to study, so I wrote it down. And I didn't worry about those things I already knew because I didn't need to. You know, we're at a point where, you know, we stand up at the front and we teach to the middle, and we're leaving the middle guys out too, actually, because they should be challenged, and we're missing everybody else. And we really need to pinpoint each of these kids individually, and that led me into the other types of reflection that Jeff was talking about. I got into using portfolios, and students would do recordings, and they would speak to me about what they knew. They would tell me about their budget, and I could listen and hear where they were getting tripped up. And we've now moved into our classrooms. They're using Seesaw and digital portfolios, and we've got first graders giving each other feedback on their projects. I was in a classroom the other day, and the student was just so excited to hear their friend Sally say, I really liked your use of vocabulary in that, and just on and on. And the teacher was working with individual students, and they were giving each other feedback. I also saw that in a high school classroom where it takes a day and a half to show 30 videos that people have created in entrepreneurship, and they put on their headphones, they listened to everybody's, gave 2 stars and a wish, got back in their groups, and then they talked about what are we going to fix and change, all done in the same instructional block, all done at the same time, instead of takes 3 days to watch them. And then it's just those are just small little stories, but some of the things that happened in my classroom and that we're seeing K-12, it's just amazing.
Well, and we're seeing with so much more creation, you know, less, I mean, and I always tell people, you know, consumption is still important, but when you focus on the creation side of it, consumption has to happen before that. But and then you see these kids as talents. You see that artist. You see the kid that loves to create movies or, you know, create visuals and posters and digital. And I still had some kids that would get out the pen and paper, but just having that choice empowered them. And it made them want to do something that much more and put more into it. And so I just have loved to see the talents of our students come out instead of everybody doing this one type of worksheet or one type of research paper or PowerPoint. Just being able to tell kids, how do you want to show your learning, and just letting them go. And it's amazing what they can create and what they're capable of. And I think that's one of the more special things, is that a lot of our iPad teachers have kind of gone away from the consumption focus and more on the creation. And what that does and what that opens up for our students is pretty amazing.
It really is. And in fact, you know, we have a group of 3rd graders, and they were working on learning all about anoles. Oh, yeah. And they went to the library to find a book on anoles. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, but there are no books, anole books in our library at our school. And so they came back and they said, well, we would like to write an anole book. So they are right now in the process. Each one of them has used Book Creator and created several pages of their book. And then they're collecting the biz, and they're going to make one from everybody in the book, publish that even people like their family members can download the book. So let creation really come into play, and many of the apps had based on that. In that pictures of anoles, so I got to go in and see how the grass was growing, and then they got the anoles in there, and they were taking videos of their anoles, finding facts about their anoles, and keeping all of that in Book Creator, and then also making things like an iMovie or in ChatterPix and different apps, and bringing those little videos into their iBooks. And then they have this really interactive book, and I really learned a lot about anoles. There's a lot to learn, but in that piece, they're really showing what they know, and in that multimodal way. So using that audio and that video, that power where you can hear their little voices telling that story, and you can feel that expression when they're talking, and capture so much more than just if they were to like write an anole book without all of the multimedia pieces in there. And I think that allows the kids, you know, like you're saying, just with that creation piece, empowers them though, because not only were they learning about the anoles, but they have something bigger than just handing something in for their teacher. They're going to be publishing big something audience. For the world. Yeah, and that big audience really validates what they're doing. And again, with just this device, it allows them to break outside of that classroom walls and really expand into the whole world. And now if other kids are in 3rd grade and don't have an annul book,
Now they can
get an annul book that's going to be just outstanding. And I think that's just the piece too, is taking something like that, just a subject that you're learning, and then take that up to new levels and transform that, recreate something that you didn't ever have. And you can invent that because you have the tool to do that now. And everyone can have a voice, which is so powerful. So that creation piece is really huge. And you know, we were talking to one of our high school teachers, Miss Sprouse, and she has been giving pen and paper tests for her pop culture class. And we were talking just about creativity in the Book Creator app, and it's kind of sharing how one day on a Twitter chat, I actually created a book with a group of people on the Twitter chat, which was really kind of fun. I really got comfy with that app. And I was talking to her about that. She goes, you know, the wheels are turning. I am going to reinvent an old quiz. And for my pop culture kids, their quiz is going to look like an iBook. And they're going to create an iBook that's going to demonstrate their understanding of these learning objectives. And they did. And they loved it. So how fabulous is that to have a creation test, a creation quiz, that whole piece of what creation can do for kids and giving them that time to create.
And that goes back to just the iPad Academy model right there. That wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have coaches going in and working with teachers directly during the plan time and during class time, because without those conversations and without Anne's experience of using the Book Creator app and doing that challenge in that chat, that wouldn't have happened. And I just remember when she was my first coach, I always like thinking like, I need all these like learning apps. I need all these history apps that have content on it. Like I need this app and this app. And my iPads were full of all these awesome apps that have all this information in them. And I never used them. Like I never used them. And so my second semester, I deleted all of those because, and it goes back to that creation. You don't need all the apps with the information on them. Now, there are some amazing apps out there for math or science and even history, but you need one or two really good ones, but you shouldn't spend much time there. It's kind of like a textbook. We shouldn't have our noses in the textbook. We should have our noses out doing something and interacting with one another. And so, you know, I think when teachers start to come in, they always want, oh, what are all the apps I need? I need the textbook app. And I always like, no, don't worry about those apps. Those are not the apps you're going to be interacting with. And you might start out with those, you know, when we talk about the SAMR model, you know, starting out in substitution, but you're going to quickly, your students aren't going to want that for very long. You know, it's still going to be, whether it's a textbook on their desk or a textbook on the iPad, that's still a textbook. And so we want to go above and beyond where that's at.
Yeah, you know, we were just rolling iPads in. We were lucky enough to grow our iPad Academy by 3 classrooms this year. So we just rolled in 3 new classrooms with iPads. So Jeanette's had her hands full in 4th grade and 2nd grade. And then Jeff and I are co-coaching a 1st grade classroom, which is really a fun experience to bring these iPads into brand new classrooms again to watch the magic start to happen. So where we're at to start off with is we started with teaching the teachers how to make those screencasts. And they learned that during their foundations training. But now it's the real deal. You got to have it ready for the kids tomorrow and ready to deliver. So we started off in this little group of 1st graders, and the teacher made a little screencast of the little worksheet that they were going to do for independent practice. So what typically would happen during independent practice is all 24 kids would be working away and their little hands in the air because, hey, I have a question. I need some help over here or over there. Can you read this to me? I don't know this word. It kind of turns into this little hot mess. And so instead, they have the video that they could just go ahead and put their little headphones on and hit play and listen to their teacher talk to them about their worksheet that they're doing. So maybe you'd think that'd be at just substitution. But really what's going on there is really more like an M or an R as far as modifying and redefining, because what it allows the kids to do now is they can actually control their teacher. They can pause their teacher, they can rewind their teacher, they can play them again. And what's especially powerful in this classroom is we've got 3 little guys that are ELL. They're not native English speakers in the classroom. And I encountered this actually when I lived in France, and when I was living with my host family, people would say things to me and I'd say, can you please repeat that? And they would repeat it just as fast, but only a lot louder. And I'm like, you know, I can hear you, but I just need it slower, please. And when we're using the app EduCreations, you can go ahead and slow down the speed, and so that rate of dictation can slow way down. So our ELL kids can slow their teacher's pacing down and listen to it slower, and then they can understand. So it's really been powerful to see just something as simple as that can really shift things for kids. And then all of a sudden, the teacher has time to pull groups for interventions or to work one-on-one with them, and really that first step in just transforming that classroom piece. So it's fun to see how just one little thing with an app that can be used all across any content area can really be a game changer.
As teachers, right? Like, we want to make sure the kids are getting our message. And once I realized the power of screencasts, I realized I can be in 25 places at once and the kids are all hearing my message. And so now I can let them go, and like Ann said, now I can be around the room working individually with students, and that's such a powerful thing where I know the kids are going to still get my message and the content that I want them to have, but they get it at their own pace. I had some kids where instead of slowing down, they timed my speed by 2, and they flew through, and they'd come up and I'm done, Mr. B. I'm like, what? And they could tell me everything they needed to know. And so it's like whatever they needed, they could have, or they could have it at night, or if they were absent, sick, whatever it might be. That's not, that instruction wasn't an event anymore. It was whenever they needed it. And I think that's a really powerful part.
And I have maybe 3 hats here. A teacher in the iPad Academy, I'm now a trainer, and I'm a parent. And so I have a daughter that I can speak to that too, that's in Mrs. Stuckenholtz's class here. And she did a screen recording, and it's in math. And I asked my daughter how things were going with the iPads and what she liked. And she said she liked how she recorded the math lecture, and she was able to stop and take notes when she needed to and rewind when she needed to. And she said, Mom, I'm not going to ask a question in class in front of all those people in there. She said, I'm just going to struggle with it. She said, but this way I could write down my question, and then I could go to my teacher later and ask, or I could just rewind it and then I got it, because sometimes she just goes too fast. And so as a mom, to hear that was very, very powerful for a daughter that works really, really hard to get the grades she gets in math. So sometimes I think people look at videos, oh my gosh, the teacher is not teaching anymore. It's not. It's making it even more personal. You don't have the distraction of other kids talking or laughing at you or whatever it might be. It really puts the teacher right there, and then she can meet one-on-one. He or she can meet one-on-one at any point in time and get the help that they need. So really powerful.
It really is. And you know, a person that was also in our inaugural class of the iPad Academy was Bree Campbell, who taught high school English, and I was able to coach her as well. And she used this whole concept of screencast, but did a little twist with it. So as an English teacher, she was really fascinated with the feedback piece on papers. So once upon a time, she would write feedback for the kids. And then once Google came around, she could go ahead and add comments as they wrote. And that was revolutionary. Really, truly was. And that was moving up SAMR too. We're writing with them and grading as they write. That was pretty great. But you know, she still wasn't seeing what she really wanted to see happen to their papers. So she was doing a lot of research, especially into multimodal feedback on her doctoral program she was in. So I felt like I got a little doctorate too. We both worked on that a little bit, but it was kind of fun. She was learning all of this great research and then applying it to her classroom. So using that same concept of screencasts, she would talk through their papers, and she would make a video of every student's papers with video feedback and drop that to them on their iPads. And they would go and put on their headphones, and they would be looking at their paper and listening to her feedback. And then they would pause her and they would revise their papers. They would play her, and then they would type some more, and pause and play and pause and play. And at the end of it all, we were talking to them about it and said, well, what about this? Did you like this or not? And they're like, oh, loved it. I felt like we had Mrs. Campbell right there with us, writing with me while I was writing. And I could tell by the tone of her voice that she loved that sentence, and she loved my choice of vocabulary. And I couldn't tell that when she was just circling stuff and writing things. And so it was so much more personal for me, and I felt like I really became a better writer. And just that, again, that impact that having that video and audio makes for our students is such a powerful thing. And, you know, transforming not just the, you know, consuming or gaining that knowledge, but also just how are we providing that timely and immediate feedback to students, which that has been neat. And that's what you were noticing too. Was that in Bethany Cloney's class with some timely and immediate feedback for math instruction with some little second graders?
With little second graders, and using map data or whatever data, whatever you're getting tested on, because we know that's there. But she is able to provide a link to them through Schoology, and they click on their range, their RIT range, and they click on that and they go right into Khan Academy, or she has some other places that she sends them, Front Row and some other places that she's found, and they work on whatever it is they need to work on. I think back in the day where you'd make 5 copies of this and 5 copies of this and then try to get them to the right people and then gather them up. But these kids just get to go and work at their own. And then if there's someone in the same RIT range or the RIT band, they can get in a group and they go ask that person first. You know, it's kind of that ask 3 then me. Go ask them for help. See if you can work it out, because kids talk the same language. And then if not, they can go to her. So she can really target that math instruction for that testing that is there, that we do need to be held accountable for still. So.
And that's what's so cool is as we, see instruction on and kind of that transformation and shift to the students, then it's kind of like, oh my gosh, what if they get done early and things like that. First of all, that's something we should celebrate. Like, they're getting done with their work. That's awesome. But that's what I love about the iPad is there's so many anchor activities, where kids can go into Front Row or Teach Me Kindergarten, and whatever it is at their level. And what's so cool about some of those too is they're getting data as they go too. So the teacher can go over there and the parents later on can see, oh my gosh, my kid's doing this, or they're at this level. And so while this kid's still getting his instruction through that video and that one-on-one intention, this kid over here, instead of sitting there bored, they're now flying and they're pushing their skills and gaining more information and understanding on these topics. And I just think that's such a powerful thing, that when you have a whole group of kids doing the same thing at the same time, you're just missing out on that opportunity where kids are being left behind and kids aren't being pushed enough. And that's where, again, the ultimate tool for differentiation is right in front of us here with these iPads.
So when you were thinking about was differentiating, like that was essentially that underlying principle that you wanted to drive through, and that idea of almost like the flip classroom for pushing through this type of individualized curriculum.
Well, I think those were kind of, they were outcomes, but we didn't necessarily have that as a planned outcome and intentionally going after that. But it was interesting that it really started to shift toward that, really, as that student-centered learning came to be. I think it's one thing that as all educators, I know when I was in the classroom as a math teacher, I wrestled with how was I going to make math different for every single student who needed different things at different times. And I did the best I could with as many strategies as I could have used. But if I would have had the iPad, I could have done even more and brought it down to that individual level like you could. So I think because of having that tool and being able to do it, it just naturally kind of went right along with that differentiation. And then as that continued to expand, it's like tapping into kind of that flip model concept, but in a different way, kind of using that in the classroom instead of not necessarily as homework or that type of thing outside of the school day. And it really, kind of transformed in that direction. But I would say a lot of different areas transformed, not just that.
Well, I know, it's just, as you're speaking here, some other things I'm thinking, we want learning to also go outside of the classroom. And our students, except for maybe 2 classrooms, I think, take these home. But what I'm noticing is kids are learning outside because they're continuing with Front Row, or they're continuing with Spelling City, or my little guy on Epic at home and reading, and he's not a reader and he's reading every night now. The things they're doing in school and the things how they're targeting that instruction and maybe letting them look at some of their interests and their passions and things, that is going home now, where for a long time it wasn't. It's go to school, I'm here. We've got some kids that are starting to pick up speed and running to school instead of just walking. We see that they're, oh my gosh, let's get there. I want to do this. I want to focus on this. I know I know this in math, and when I get done with it, I can work on coding, and because that's what my love is. So as we're talking here, I'm thinking, I see this in my own house, and I know I've talked to other parents where this is seeping into home life too. So kids are extending their learning beyond the classroom walls.
Well, and people always ask with how I set my classroom, are you a flipped classroom? And I was like, no, I'm not. If anything, I'm a choice flipped. Again, it goes back to that choice. I'm not a big fan of having kids being forced to do a lot at home. Now, if they want to, and if they want to extend their project at home, and so kids could, in my class, watch the video before they came in and then spend that choice day where they have the day to work on their objectives, working on their work and actually creation. Or some kids would do the videos in class and then start their creation in class, and then it continue at home. So I always told my kids, you don't have homework unless you don't get it all done in class. And I always gave them enough time to do those things. And so, I call it a choice flipped, but my base was around just engagement. How can I engage these kids and get all of them, instead of engaging 85, 90% of them, how can I engage 100% on a daily basis? And then that where it comes into that differentiation with choice and personalizing the learning and giving them the different paths to learning, and then just tapping into their strengths and their love. Like if you love singing, create a song and sing it. You love to write. If you love to create video, do it. If whatever you love to do, try to weave that into American history or social studies, however we can. And so, that's the hook. And so, and kind of the head fake that we always try to give with our kids.
And that flows right into, there are 3 math teachers that were at Jeff's building that I was also working with, and Tina and Sarah and Chelsea all use that same concept, starting with those screencasts, but they've now got choice-based math classrooms, which is really interesting, where they don't necessarily, if they watch the video and need that support, they've got it, but otherwise they have choice on how they want to show that they understand those math concepts. So that could be, again, a poster, it could be working together, it could be doing a problem set, could be making a screencast and teaching someone else that looks completely different for every single student, and yet, their path eventually to that learning can be all kinds of different things, but eventually they all know that learning objective. So it's been really fun to see how all those different strategies and frameworks work together to create something that's really unique for each of those classrooms and each of those learners. I think connecting, though, to the world has been really neat. We have one of our classrooms is a Spanish classroom that we also have the iPads in, and they have been having a really fun time connecting to another classrooms where they can practice their Spanish speaking language skills, and then using, again, some of the audio features on the iPads so that they're talking in Spanish regularly. It used to be where, maybe the teacher would call up a student or 2 at a desk and you just do your oral test right out loud to me here at your desk. Well, it doesn't look like that anymore. Now it looks like 30 kids all doing an oral test at the same time. And bigger than that, they're talking Spanish all the time to one another, or like in Notability, just hitting the audio and recording, and they can read all kinds of Spanish sentences and create their own their projects. So, but having a global connection is huge for that Spanish class, because now vocabulary matters. They don't have vocabulary in Spanish. You can't talk very much. So they really spend some time thinking about what they're going to say, make sure they know those vocabulary words.
So we've only got a few minutes left, but I was curious if you were to give suggestions for other schools that are getting started, or even some folks, I was actually working with a group just the other day where they've had iPads for a while, and they're like, okay, we get it, we have these iPads, and like, now what? And they're struggling to figure out, well, how am I really starting to transform my practice and to do some of those things that you're mentioning? So if you were to give suggestions on, getting started and maintaining that momentum, what would it be?
It really, the key of this, and it all boils down to all the time, is people, and investing the money and time in the people, their training. Like, we all comes back to having, I really feel, a successful model where you can teach people how to teach with crafting a learning environment with these devices. And it's something that you didn't learn in college, and you probably weren't taught that way. So it's not something that you have a huge repertoire in your prior knowledge to pull from. And so again, and we've seen the same thing you have. We have people come to us all the time like, well, I've got a set of iPads in my district and they just sit in the back of the classroom. And we just think, oh, no, well, here's a couple of things to get you started. But it's so crucial to have a well thought out professional development program to really make this effective.
Yeah, and that support is so important, and just getting teachers to encourage them to let go and try new things. And it's a tough thing to do, and that's where that support comes in, and just really kind of, you gotta get in there and help them out and give them time. I think the gift of time is huge too. Allowing teachers to be able to have time to develop, collaborate, and really think through what's going on in their classrooms. And it is a challenge, but you've got to get have that willingness. And I think that's where you start like how we did, start small with a few people that really invest in them and get them to let go. And once you can be able to have somebody say, hey, look, that's what it can be. That's what you can do as well. It really is a powerful thing. And that's one of the things that we've started doing in our model is we're having our iPad Academy teachers now go to each other's classrooms and see what each other is doing. And okay, this is what you're doing. You're doing this in your classroom and they're teaching the same thing, but look at how they're doing it. Look how they're letting go now. Look at how they're letting the iPad and the device kind of be a big part of that learning and letting the kids really transform and take on the learning. That's huge.
Yes, and I think in terms of when you actually look inside the classroom then, what does it look like? Where should they start? What should they do? I think it's okay to start small, to maybe look at something. And again, don't look, this is a tool to help. What would you like to change about the way you're teaching? And when Jeff said, I look at my students and I say, what's the best way for them to learn this content? How can this tool help you change the way you were doing it before, and how can I make it, if you really think about each of those kids individually, how can I make this one lesson, this one unit more individual so they have a choice and each and every student can find their own path and go on their own path to learn that. Just starting small, and once you start small and see that change, it'll encourage you to continue on and connect with people. Just as you said, with that collaboration, to find any districts that are doing it, to let those people get together and share ideas, and get in contact with other people that are doing it, and on Twitter and through other social media and hangouts, and meet with people and seek people out for support, because that's what we need.
Yeah, those baby steps, because we've seen those baby steps happen in our first grade classroom, and we've just focused on one little area. But then all of a sudden that teacher's wheels start to turn and says, wait a second, I could do this, now I understand this concept. And so just giving them those little bits and then letting them kind of take off and saying, yes, that's it, now let's go, let's try.
It's like when we started with our one classroom, each of us had one classroom, and that one classroom that used the iPads, and we used them for a while, and then the wheels started turning and we thought, whoa, we've got to open up this opportunity to our other students.
That's right. And and I think too, when you think starting small, again, you don't need 1 million apps. You don't need to spend $1 million on apps. You start and get good with 2 or 3 apps or 5 apps, but don't go more than 2 handfuls, and just get really good with those core apps and how that can shift what you're doing, and let the kids get good at that, and then relish in that. Celebrate that success. I was watching a TED Talk that, we don't celebrate enough successes, and sometimes that's why we don't keep ourselves moving forward and we kind of plateau, but celebrate that success and move on to the next. But having a great path to deliver that content to your iPad is really crucial. So whether that be iTunes U or a Google Drive kind of a thing, or Schoology or some other kind of learning management system, but it's really crucial to have a path onto your device and a path off of your device, and getting the kids fluent in that so that you have a great flow of information to and from the devices. So, yeah.
All right, well, I can't thank the 3 of you enough for coming and chatting today. It's so nice to actually be able to talk to you and not just 140 character sound bites. So it was super exciting, and I hope we can do this again. I know I have a lot to think about. Anne, you mentioned, you were hanging out with someone or working with a teacher who was working on her doctorate, and I'm actually working on mine right now, and I just finished a paper about like constructivism and cognitivism, and my brain's just going right now like, oh yeah, they said this, and I totally see where this connects. And so it was super exciting on a lot of different levels to hear like just the real thoughtfulness that you have going into your program. So I can't thank you enough for joining us, and I'm sure we'll hear from other folks with comments and things, but it's wonderful to have you, and I hope you have a great afternoon. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for inviting us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Yes, we enjoyed it.
It was awesome.
All right, great. Well, thanks very much. We're going to stop this broadcast. And for everybody else, I think we've got another webinar next week if you're tuning in. So please come back and join us. So thanks very much, gang, and we'll see you soon.